on Talking Lifestyle. Property Fast Track with Charles Tarbey. Thanks to Century 21. Smarter, bolder, faster. Go to century21.com.au.
And that phone number is the same for us too, 13 12 83. Property Fast Track is here, and Charles Tarbey, welcome.
Welcome. You're welcome back. Thank you very much.
Good to be.
I forgot where I was for a moment.
That's all right, mate. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
At Talking Lifestyle on Property Fast Track. And you're here to take people's phone calls tonight, 13 12 83. Maybe you're considering getting into buying. Perhaps you want to sell. Maybe you're investing. Charles can help you out with that stuff because he's got a whole lot of data at his fingertips, and he's been in the game long enough to know how to do things, I reckon. 13 12 83. Charles Tarbey taking your calls right now. Or you can email if you want to be a little more anonymous about it. Click on feedback at talkinglifestyle.com.au or the phone, 13 12 83. So, Charles, a market wrap from the weekend. We had some fairly big movements across three states, particularly Sydney and Melbourne. Again, some big clearance rates.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be changing at all. In fact, when I look at the stats, and I not only compare this week over last week, but I always compare this time over exactly last year. Mm-hmm. And you think when we're looking at in April last year, March, April last year, it was people were talking boom, it was massive and going forward. And I look at the stats now, and Sydney hit 80.7% this week. Again, around about where it was last week at 81.1. But this time last year it was 68.9%. So there's still a significant climb going on, but it's also like that in Melbourne, and it's also like that in Canberra and Adelaide. They're all moving along. The ones that have been struggling a little bit in terms of their clearance rates have been Perth and Brisbane, although Brisbane sitting in the 50s right now is pretty good for Brisbane. Okay. Yeah.
13 12 83. We've got David on the line. Good evening. How are you?
I'm well, yourself?
Good, mate. How can we help you?
Just want to find out, I've got an investment property I'm thinking of selling at some stage, and I'm just thinking about the capital gains tax. Does it lower if my taxable income's lower? Does it work like that?
Well, it does definitely. Everything depends on your income when it comes to tax purposes. There's no question about that. But is this in a super fund or is it in a personal?
Just in a personal.
Yeah, it is. And I think also you're obviously going to get a capital gains discount when you look at that as well. So not all of your profit is a capital gain tax affected. So it's important. But as a real estate practitioner, I'm not really supposed to be telling you any of this, David. But I'm sure you'll find out pretty easily from somebody who is registered to give you that advice. I certainly know from my point of view, I am taxed pretty heavily around the traps, whether it's payroll tax or land tax or capital gains tax. My company cops it all around the traps, and the last time I looked to see whether it was attached to my wage, I don't remember. I'm too busy cutting a cheque for the next one.
Yeah. Okay, understand.
Thanks, David. There's some general advice, and get some more kind of specific advice on a Wednesday night at the same time here with Brett Steen from Jacaranda Financial. Brett's always here week on week. So good general stuff anyhow. 13 12 83. Keep those calls coming because Charles Tarbey's here from Century 21 with a wealth of knowledge if you're considering getting into property or maybe getting out of it or maybe reevaluating how you're in it. 13 12 83.
It's a good time to be doing that because a lot of people are looking at the interest rate changes that are going on out there, how it's going to impact on them. A lot of people say, don't fix your loans. Others are talking that, now's the time to fix your loans. And I think people really need to look very closely at their circumstances before they do anything because everybody's circumstances are so different. But there is opportunity out there, and I know that we're going to continue to talk about interest rate movement because it's impacting very heavily across the country. And my biggest concern with the interest rate movement is that it might slow down investment because a lot of the focus is on investors. But that sort of slowdown in investors is going to impact very, very heavily on areas like Perth, for example, where they need investment, or in a place like Hobart or southeast Queensland, they keep talking about all the apartments that are coming out of the ground. They need investment. So the more that they focus on reducing an investor's ability to do something, then I could see down the track there could be some real issues with regards to the real estate market.
RBA meets tomorrow, doesn't it? And there'll be an announcement regarding rate rises?
The RBA would... The only reason they'd move rates in any case is economic right now. I mean, they tried to look at or connect it back to slowing down the real estate market, but the two aren't connected. It's got to be back to the banks, and I think the banks have taken the reins, and APRA and the banks are probably dominating what's going on in terms of interest rates in the real estate market. Because you know what happens with the banks, the rate drops and the banks don't have to pass it on. In many cases, they don't.
There's a letter that was released by APRA just a few days ago at the end of March, 31st of March, and as detailed in this letter, APRA expects ADIs to limit the flow of new interest-only lending to 30% of new resi mortgage lending, and within that, place strict internal limits on the volume of interest-only lending at loan-to-valuation ratios above 80%.
Yep.
And ensure there's a strong scrutiny and justification of any instances of interest-only lending at an LVR above 90%.
Right. And again, that's where they've been focusing. A lot of them have changed the way in which they lend. I mean, traditionally, you could get a 95% loan, depending on the marketplace and how it's moved. And nowadays, they're really pushing that back. Again, they're changing the way people can borrow money, people who can bring their money in from overseas. That's changed. They're changing the way the developers can bring properties out of the ground. So the banks have also placed restrictions there. You can't sell a percentage of the development to overseas buyers. There's only a small percentage now that you can sell to overseas buyers. So they've changed that. They've got suburbs across Australia where some of the banks are now not even lending in those suburbs across the country. So you can imagine what some people are going through. If somebody's trying to sell, unless they have cash or they've got an incredibly strong relationship with their bank, those sellers are vulnerable. And this is what I was saying. You can raise the rates on the eastern seaboard, but you've got to be careful how much damage you're doing on the west coast as well.
13 12 83, and we'll have a look at that APRA story in more detail a bit later in the show with Ben Braysich, who's National Manager for Century 21 Home Loans. And along the journey for the next 45 minutes or so, we'll go around the grounds, Charles, and have a look at what's happening at C21. Can I call it C21?
You can. That sounds lovely.
Is that okay? Good with that?
I should go and check if it's registered.
C21 Gold Coast, and also we'll take a look at what's going on in Adelaide, and Tom Panos, who's an auctioneer, will take a look at what happened in backyards around Australia over the last couple of days. 13 12 83, Charles Tarbey taking your calls on all things real estate. Now, what are you making of property listing numbers at the moment?
Yeah, they're actually negative again, but only slightly negative. 0.83% they went back this week over last week. But the amount of stock that's on the market is, over 100,000 in the mid 105s, 106. And
so there's 105,000 properties on the market in Australia right now.
That's correct.
In the residential and investment scenario?
Investment area, yes. And
not commercial, so just resi and investment.
I'm watching those numbers each week, what percentage they climb or go backwards. And the good thing is that it's not going backwards at the rapid rate it was this time last year. And I'm talking to a lot of agents around the real estate market, and they're all starting to say the same thing. There's a little bit more negotiating going on. There's a little bit more hesitancy from buyers in the marketplace. I spoke to one agent today, and he said, I spoke to a vendor, and they hadn't had the activity they wanted, and they agreed to reduce their price. Now, I haven't heard that being said around the countryside for a long time.
Where was that?
It's in North Shore of Sydney.
North Shore of Sydney, okay. Which is a hotspot.
Yeah, that's one of the hotspots. So those are the sort of signs that people don't know about. They don't. When you're out there in the marketplace, you're not hearing those stories. You might be reading what's going in the paper, but there's a different movement going on underneath that at all times. So what you're reading and what's really happening are always two very different things. And the signs are there. The signs are changing. My greatest joy in watching all the stock is it's not going backwards at the rapid rate it was. So from my perspective, if it's only going back slightly, and the last week was only slight, the week before was a massive increase, then from my perspective, hey, we could be seeing a situation where that levelling of stock starts coming in. There might be more of a positive move, particularly with apartments that are coming out of the ground or out of the ground and coming on the market. There'll be potentially a significant number of people that won't complete the purchase of an off-the-plan transaction.
No.
There'll be banks kicking in saying, well, you bought it at that price 2 years ago. We want to get it revalued now. And in some cases, they'll do better. In other cases, I'm not so sure. The banks will also say, hey, we want a higher deposit than what we approved it on in the past. Your interest rate may be different. There's a whole series of things when you're buying off the plan that you've got to factor in. Then there's the flip side, which is where the developer has made a substantial gain and the market's still climbing, and they might not complete the construction within the time of the sunset clause, and the property's back on the market again. They can take it off you, and off they go again, sell it to somebody else, and you've lost all that time and all that capital gain yourself, particularly if you sold something in the meantime.
13 12 83. We are talking property fast track tonight. Charles Tarbey's here, and he can take your calls on 13 12 83 if you have any kind of considerations when it comes to property, getting into property or getting out of it, or kind of reevaluating the way that you're in it. On 13 12 83, Charles can help you. We hear a lot about off the plan, Charles. I'd be keen to know what you have learnt, what you observe about older apartments, maybe Art Deco apartments, ones that have been up for maybe 20, 30, 40 years, the old blonde brick ones that popped up all over the joint
there are quite
in
a
the
few
70s. I mean, I kind of personally like them because I like a higher ceiling. I don't like the aluminium windows, but you know what I mean? Yeah. There's some kind of nuances attached to either of those styles. You either like modern or you don't. What are you seeing happen with the prices, though, with those older apartment blocks?
Yeah,
where will there be more? Is there more growth possible there, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely, and there's a reason for that potential growth. But I just do remember we used to call them flats, and now we call them apartments. Going back in the day.
Flat. Yeah, you're right. In the 80s, they were flats, right?
Flats.
When did we get on board with the apartment?
I don't know.
Is it an Americanisation?
Somebody with a great marketing idea. Now it's
a flat.
It's wonderful to live in an apartment. People have migrated to that style of living. But going back to your question about older complexes, one of the biggest advantages with an older complex is that the density of construction or allowance for density of construction may have changed in some of those areas. And if you're part of a block of flats that might only be 6 units, you might have noticed across the road there's a complex with 24 units. And all of a sudden, that potential site that you're sitting in with other people may be worth significantly more as a development site than it would be as a dwelling to live in. And a lot of people may not have worked that out yet, but there's a significant amount of those types of properties around, and there's a great upside for people in those areas. And a lot of those apartments, the smaller ones, have been snapped up a lot lately because off-the-plan sales, of course, went fairly crazy, and most people try to buy new than established.
Yeah.
And if ever you in the older days of real estate in the 70s and 80s, you get flown up to Queensland or flown up to one of the islands or driven down south, and you got driven.
With a stop off at the ostrich farm and the olive grove on the way.
All the lovely spots, all the lovely spots on the way. You never saw the industrial estate or any of those areas when you were travelling.
Yeah.
And what you didn't see was what was selling that was already established stock or older stock that was selling not less than a kilometre away from you. And a lot of people would pay this new price and not even look to realise that there was a better buy down the road. But it might have needed some work, but there was a better buy down the road.
Possibly just to paint a coat. A coat of paint.
It's okay.
That gets me, that one. I swear I'm dyslexic some days. I get that. All right, so possibly that's a good place to get into on two fronts. Yeah. You may well get some appreciation, some capital gains, if the whole block is either renovated or on sold to a developer.
That's correct. And I think some of the developers have picked up on that, and they send people out knocking on doors and looking for various complexes. And the new legislation has been introduced to allow those sorts of developments to be voted upon by the occupants in a lower percentage than 100%. And so things have changed in that arena where some people wanted to sell and others didn't, and you ended up being stuck in that environment if you wanted to use your asset for further growth. But I think apartments or units, whatever we want to call them.
Flats.
Flats.
I like the flats.
Yeah, flats. I lived in a flat. I think my first flat was out at Penrith, of all places, when flats were really flats.
Yeah.
And I think I was 21. I'd just about opened or purchased my first real estate office. And I rented this property because I'd sold my home to do this real estate business. And it was one bedroom with the kitchen and the lounge room all in one little area, and the bathroom was an ensuite, and it was full of Pabco plastic furniture. It was fully furnished, and it did overlook the industrial estate.
Beautiful.
In Penrith, but but Penrith itself has all changed now too, and it's become a very, very classy area now.
See, back then you had a view of things to come.
I certainly did.
Yeah,
I certainly did.
13 12 83. We are Property Fast Track tonight with Charles Tarbey from Century 21, and he's here to take your calls on 13 12 83. 1283, or you can click feedback at talkinglifestyle.com.au. We'll speak with Tom Panos in a moment with the auction wrap for Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. Yeah, Property Fast Track tonight. Nick Bennett and Charles Tarbey. We're talking about flats. Of course, flats are big in Britain. They were big here once upon a time, and they've been renamed apartments.
Apartments, yes.
I'm always a big fan of the song City Flat by Boom Crash Opera from the late 80s. Of course, that wouldn't work these days, Charles. Not in this nation anyhow.
Not in this nation.
Yeah, it goes like this. It's a great song. Do you remember this?
I do.
City Flat. Bit of a musical trip back in time, Charles, to the very late 80s when they were flats. Now, Tom Panos is on board, auctioneer. You are in Sydney, right, Tom?
Yes, I am.
Real estate coach, but he travels the nation with an auction wrap tonight for Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. Mate, interesting results?
Yes, look, the results, Nick and Charles, still look good, but as Charles would know, there's always a pause and there's always a gap between what's actually happening and what's going to be reported. And whilst the auction results are still looking reasonably okay, Nick,
yep.
I actually think that the amount of people coming through properties has eased, the intensity has eased, and I think it'll be reflected over the next 3 to 6 months. You're going to actually see a more subdued marketplace in all of those 3 cities, even though today CoreLogic RP data presented the fact that 19% growth for Sydney for the last 12 months, highest in 15 years. Melbourne was at 15.9 for 12 months. So it all looks fantastic. But as someone that's on the ground and seeing it, I am beginning to see small cracks, particularly with homes that don't have 5 ticks against them.
Yeah, it's interesting, Tom. We talked earlier, prior to you coming on, about the fact that what you are hearing out there in the marketplace, what's being reported in the marketplace and what's actually happening aren't aligned. There's 2 very different marketplaces moving at exactly the same time. And I'm seeing the same thing. I'm hearing it out there. And you know, Tom, it could be that you may end up having to go back to the good old days of actually doing an auction and having the agents work with you in the auction arena or in an auction room or in the front yard of a property, rather than you standing back doing all of the work.
Yeah, I think, Charles, I think I'm going to take out my manual 101, how to put a deal together, and I'm going to study it over the winter months because I think I'm going to need it in spring.
Yes.
Hey, Tom, what are those 5 ticks? Just going back a question or 2 there. What are the 5 ticks?
Okay. A 5 tick is a property that's in a great spot. That's a big tick.
Yep.
A property that, you know, believe it or not, a big tick is a home that people can add value. So unrenovated is actually a tick for a lot of people. Another tick is if it's not unrenovated, it is to be beautifully, totally renovated. What people don't like, Nick, is the in-between, trying to be everything to everyone. Another thing that's a big tick is the location in terms of, is it close to infrastructure? Are people going to have to walk half an hour to public transport? So what we're talking about is proximity to transport.
Yep.
If it's in the catchment of great schools, that's a big tick. It didn't used to be, but now people wanting to buy in the right catchment is a big tick. And the other thing is that you want to be in an area where there is other, you know, nice homes. You don't want to have this beautiful home and right around you you've got homes that are trash, that you've got, you know, properties that need a lot of work. You don't want to have the best home in the worst street.
As they say, how can I fly like an eagle when I'm surrounded by turkeys?
Oh, well, you're lucky you've got Charles next to you today. I don't know what you're doing tomorrow.
You're a good boy, Tom.
Hey, mate, you got all this great anecdotal information, Tom, because you're an auctioneer on the ground, right? Grassroots, in the backyards, in the rooms each week. I wonder whether people have kind of put more focus upon being in a good school catchment area in maybe more expensive suburbs or suburbs where they've got to dig deeper into the pockets because they maybe can't afford private schools as they did in the old days. So now they're relying more upon public school systems and want better schools from that system. What do you think?
Yes, I think you're absolutely spot on, Nick, because if you actually have a look at the after-tax income that's needed to, say, one child at a private school is approximately 20. So you've got to be earning 35. and there's another 35 if you've got a second kid. That means $70,000 of your pre-tax salary is going purely to tuition fees at a private school. So if you are someone that says, hey, I don't want to be up to $70,000 for the next 15 years, which is a significant amount of money, they're going to make sure that the home that they buy is in the right streets and in that map, and they will go to extreme troubles. I've got to say, Nick, I have known of instances where people would actually put fraudulent addresses.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm aware of that.
Have been living in another place to get into the right school.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, and it gets right up my nose because these folks live quite a distance away from that particular school. They do nothing but leech off it and put nothing back into the community. Yeah, it's not good. I get grumpy about that. This could, look, you know, I'm having a gag here, guys. This could be a false economy. The only way around this, Tom, if you want to go private school, is to have the fourth child because sometimes they're free.
Oh, well, yes. So that's something we'd never thought of. You get broke on the first three, but the fourth one will be fine.
Yeah, I saw a car. My son went to a private school, Tom, and there's this four-wheel Mercedes-Benz that I'd spot around the school grounds, and it said 5 kids at King's on it, you know. So that was, 5 kids at King's. So that would have cost a pretty penny,
you betcha.
no doubt.
Yeah.
Tom, moving on to Melbourne, can I ask you a question? You know, there was just over 940 to 950 auctions registered, a few more than last week, and the clearance rate was still strong. What are the agents telling you down there?
Yeah, look, they're saying that it's strong, but they also think it's hit its peak. But Charles, it wasn't that strong for Shane Warne's house because Shane Warne's childhood home went to auction on Saturday in Hampton, Melbourne, and it got passed in at $1.5 million. So a lot of them are selling, but Charles, Melbourne is actually reflecting what's happening in Sydney. And I actually caught up with the Century 21 office on Wednesday night. The great office that you've got there, Charles, with your two fellow Greek owners.
Oh, Tom's Greek, of course.
Right.
Yeah, we forgot to mention that.
You're wrong nationality there, Tom, for Charles, but it doesn't matter.
I wasn't bringing that in deliberately. It was just I was there on the Wednesday, and he told me that in his area, property prices have gone up. Like the average price, we're talking about where it's just outside of Oakley. We're talking about the median price in that suburb is $1 million now.
Yes.
And it's quite extraordinary, but not everything is selling. But guys, before I go off today, I'll tell you where is a bit of a concern. I've been talking to a lot of agents, the cyclone storm areas.
Yeah, Brisbane North, yep. Okay. Obviously, northern New South Wales as well. To just tell me what you think there about the Brisbane market.
Okay, so what happened, Charles, if we look at 2011 with the floods, what we clearly saw, what happened was there was a total slowdown in transaction activity. So I expect there to be a slowdown. You'll just see less transactions taking place. I do think that a lot of homes, I do feel sorry for the people that have been on the market now because I think that there's, a possibility that their sales are going to be impacted, particularly if they were affected by the floods.
Yes, of course.
But what we're going to see is a temporary effect on prices, which is more reflective of damage stock going through the market. But we will see things bounce back again. I just feel like, everyone that was affected by that, we're going to see a halt in real estate for a short period of time.
Well, Tom, it's always a pleasure to hear your voice and look forward to seeing you a little later on. And also next week with some more interesting stories about what's happening in the Eastern Seaboard with auctions.
Pleasure to see you. Speak to you again, Nick and Charles. I'll see you later on.
Yes,
all the best.
Yes.
All right, Tom Panos, auctioneer and a real estate coach. And yes, another big weekend for Melbourne and Sydney. In fact, Sydney posted its 4th consecutive Saturday with a clearance rate of over 80%. We'll go around the grounds in a moment and see what's shaken on the Gold Coast and Adelaide. Charles Tarbey here tonight on Property Fast Track, taking your calls on 13 12 83. Nick Bennett with you tonight for this Monday, and Charles Tarbey taking your calls 13 12 83. All things to do with property buying, selling, investing. Give him a buzz. He's got a wealth of knowledge on 13 12 83 as we go around the grounds, thanks to Century 21's extensive national network of real estate agents. It's always good to get a snapshot of a particular region and crack in with Charles a little more kind of local knowledge about that area with the help of our boots on the ground local experts.
Yeah, it's good to get them on board because, as we always talked about, the market's changing no matter where we are, and each market is very, very different. And I thought we'd bring in Adelaide because we haven't talked a lot about SA and maybe WA just to see, because there are people on the eastern seaboard who want to invest in those areas,
Yep.
and they don't know what's happening. And as I said earlier in the show, we always seem to hear about what's going on in the eastern seaboard and how great it is. And I think it's important we bring in.
No, I'm with you. I like to cast the net a whole lot wider as well.
And the same with the coast, the Gold Coast, which has had a really difficult time over the years. There was a time there where you couldn't sell anything, and now there's a lot of interest on the Gold Coast, and this is why I think it's great to bring in Sasan to tell us what's going on up there.
Evening, Sasan.
Good evening. How are you guys?
Good, thanks, mate. Tell us about your area. Where exactly are you?
Well, I'm specializing in the Royal Pines Resort golfing state. It's situated in Bennett. It's a suburb of Gold Coast. It is about 10 minutes to the Surfers Paradise downtown and 10 or 15 minutes to Broad Beach, Robina Town Centre, and easy access to the M1 for day trips to Brisbane or the Coolangatta Airport.
I know it well. I know Boonaroo Park, postcode 4211, not too far from the Rang.
There we go.
Yes.
Sorry, mate.
What did you do up there, Nick?
Another time. But I do know it well. I've kicked a few AFL balls around Carrara. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Sasan is pretty much known as the mayor of Royal Pines. And I went up there, we had a conference up there, and I went and played some golf. And so everywhere I went, they stopped him and talked to him, and we got looked after fantastically with our games of golf. But your marketplace is interesting, Sasan. With Royal Pines, is that a structure itself where I think NRMA, is it NRMA or
RAC?
RAC, Victoria.
Victoria.
They own the whole complex?
That's right. So in 2009, RACV bought the whole resort and the 5-star hotel, and they've been spending a lot of money upgrading the resort. Just recently, they've been awarded the Australian PGA Men's Championship to be played in there.
Wow.
So they've upgraded the golf course last year.
And they added another 18 holes, because what I understand from that organisation is that the money they make on various developments, they have to spend back in that development. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
So they're very wealthy. So in other words, they built another 18 holes because where else are they going to spend the money?
That's right, yes.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
The whole golf course just for the PGA, and it's a great golf course.
And you market properties, sort of freestanding properties, homes around that whole region?
That's right. So there are in total about 1,100 homes, consisting of apartments and villas and duplexes and large homes.
Why should people buy there, Sasan?
Well, the location, Charles, and the lifestyle, really. The location of the Royal Pines Resort is really very central within the Gold Coast region. It's got, within the good catchment area of good schools, great state schools, and some great private schools are here. And then also the lifestyle. You can, before your listeners in Sydney and Melbourne, they can sell their homes over there, come and buy a really beautiful, nice house within Royal Pines, security gated, and still have some money left over.
Yeah, and I think that was always the attraction. Melbourne is very much attracted to the Queensland market.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there you go, Nick. That's probably how you ended up there, isn't it?
Well, very much so. I mean, I've got some friends from South Aussie and Melbourne as well, and country Victoria, places like Mildura, and I don't know whether it's because of the AFL connection, but 20 or 30 years ago there was a big pull from the south to the Gold Coast from people from places like South Australia and Victoria.
Well, one of our top agents who's now since retired is a guy by the name of Bob Good, who was an AFL champion. We have Craig Baum, who has a Century 21 office over in the West, and his brother Neil Baum is still very much royalty in the AFL.
Well, mate,
world.
all AFL champions are good, no doubt about that. Hey, thanks for your time, Sasan Rahmani. We'll go to Adelaide now with Greg
Thanks,
Nybo.
Sasan.
He's the principal of Century 21 in Salisbury, South Adelaide, Salisbury South in Adelaide. Good evening, Greg.
Hello, how are you, everyone?
Good, thanhanks, mate.
Oh, now let me just give you a bit of background on this guy.
Please.
This guy's been in real estate. How old are you now, Greg? Come on, truce.
54 next Thursday.
54, and you started when you were about 17 or 18 with your dad?
17, that's right, yes.
And Greg was the president of Real Estate Institute in South Australia at one stage. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's
You
right.
did.
Yes, I had a bit of a turn there from an industry point of view, yeah.
And the reason I wanted to make sure you came on was because you've been responsible for helping the South Australian government literally sell entire new suburbs.
Yeah, we were favoured back in early 2000 with an urban renewal project in the Salisbury North area, where basically they demolished a lot of the old housing commission homes and really just reharvested the location through demolition, land division, building of new, refurbishment of old. It was a 10-year listing, believe it or not, and it was a significant project. So if you to go there today from where it was, it's quite an amazing transformation.
They built the infrastructure first. Is that how they worked at the time?
No, well, the infrastructure was there. It was quite extraordinary, really. You had great schools, fantastic sporting facilities, but the housing stock was just so out of date, and it desperately needed a refurb. So both the local council and the state government, through our South Australian Housing Trust at the time, made that decision to look at the whole suburb as an urban renewal project.
And this is what we've been talking about for a long time. We've been talking about the fact that the New South Wales government, for instance, is not as well connected to the local councils as, say, the Victorian government is or the South Australian government is. And things get done a lot quicker and a lot easier than they might get done here in say, the Sydney market. I know of councils, Greg, in the Sydney marketplace where when you lodge a development application, you almost go immediately to the Land and Environment Court at the same time, just because of the processes.
It just seems crazy to me, because if you're looking at the whole issue, which is a big topic at the moment of housing affordability, a lot of these older homes are on significant parcels of land, and you get 3 or 4 together, demolish exactly what's there, reharvest it to smaller allotments with a higher yield, and of course you're able to keep the pricing down.
Yeah.
And you've got a great train system there, right? You had a train there since 1857. You've got regular services into Adelaide CBD. That's obviously a plus.
Yeah, well, we have the train, and we've even got a tram now for CBD, so that's even...
Do you really?
Yes, right down the middle of it.
Like Glenelg?
Absolutely. Like Glenelg, absolutely.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a fabulous place for restaurants and wineries. Of course, we all know some of the best wines in the world come from your area, Greg. In looking at the real estate market there, one of the things that interested me most was that you could get a piece of land in some of those areas that you're marketing to, normal building block, and you could potentially get up to 4 apartments built on that block.
That's exactly right. So we're actually just getting involved with a new project in a suburb called Andrews Farm, which is in our sort of northern growth corridor, which I'll be putting to the market in the next few weeks. I think we've got allotments there which will be about 200 square metres of overall land area, which you were able to put a 2-storey dwelling on there. And we'll have product hitting the market, Charles, believe it or not, sub 200.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. Sub $200,000.
Okay.
And I think, people might say, oh, gee, the lifestyle's changing, whatever. But you look at all of the inner west suburbs of most of the capital cities, and they're on small blocks of land, or they're terraces, semi-detached housing, and people have lived like that for years. And this is what I don't quite understand. We have a housing crisis in Sydney mainly because there wasn't a response that was needed, even though it was called upon so many years ago. And here we are now trying to find ways to help people buy property because they didn't get stuck into resolving the issue and the problem all of those years ago.
Mm-hmm. There's no doubt the synergies with local government authorities and the state government from a planning point of view, it absolutely just makes sense that the two should work a lot closer to look at opportunities, perhaps in older areas, to enable that type of reharvesting or increasing the yields, and clearly it's all about supply.
It is. Greg, as always, it's been fantastic talking to you. You've just got so much knowledge in real estate. I'd love you to come back and talk to us more about some of these properties. Sub 200 is just amazing.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Greg.
Cheers, Greg. That's Greg Nybo from Century 21 in Adelaide. I haven't heard that term harvesting in real estate before. I like it. In fact, in South Australia, Victoria, about midway through their grape and almond harvest this year. It's about a month late because it was a pretty cool spring at the end of 2016.
Okay,
so they're a bit slow this year, but they're another couple of weeks and they'll be done. And all those grapes, Charles, will be off the vine, sitting in vats, getting ready for you to have a bit of a tipple in about 12 months' time.
I might try that tonight.
Century 21 Property Fast Track tonight. Charles Tarbey here to take your calls on 13 12 83, or you can email clickfeedback@talkinglifestyle.com.au. In a moment, Ben Braysich joins us and we'll have a look at the further tightening of interest-only loans. Charles Tarbey's here tonight taking your calls, all things real estate, buying, selling, investing, 13 12 83. Nick Bennett with you. And late last week, the banking regulator tightened the noose on investor lending standards when it announced a crackdown on interest-only loans, and this move comes in the wake of most of the major banks announcing an off-cycle increase in interest rates for investors. Some are seeing this as a calculated attempt to curb the debt-fueled excitement of property investment in this country. Others are saying, too little, too late. Let's examine this in further detail with Ben Braysich, the National Manager for Century 21 Home Loans on Property Fast Track. G'day, Ben.
G'day, how are you?
Good, mate.
Hey, Ben. Good to have you on the... Yeah, very well. Good to have you on the program. Ben's got a fantastic background as well, Nick, in that he's been with all the major players in terms of Macquarie and more recently in private wealth with CBA in a very, very high position. So he knows what's going on and he's got his finger on the pulse. Ben, what exactly has the APRA authority done here with all of this?
Yeah, look, APRA, since probably about December 2014, they've been closely monitoring residential mortgage lending trends and also looking at the impacts of resilience of the lenders. And off the back of that, over the last couple of years, been making recommendations to the banks. Last Friday, they've come out with, I guess, probably more scrutiny on some of those recommendations, and I'll probably leave that with three key points. What they're looking at, effectively here, they're looking at a flow on the new interest-only lending, 30% of the total new residential mortgage lending. They're also looking at limiting the volume of interest-only lending on the loan-to-value ratio to above 80%. And probably another key takeout there, and it has been in place for some time, but ensuring that the serviceability metrics of the banks use, including interest rate and net income buffers, are set at appropriate levels for the current conditions.
APRA got stuck into investors a couple of years back, and why do you think they stopped? Why do you think they pulled up at that time?
Look, I think the landscape changes often in lending, and if you look at lending, the issue we've got here is that it's not just about one particular property market. So when you look on balance of a bank's lending book, they've got to look at all the different markets and ensure that there's still one lending responsibly and prudently, but also looking at growth inside the banking system. So it's not just looking at one particular segment.
But the lending responsible lending, there are people now that can't do what that I was able to do 5 or 10 or 20 years ago and take a few risks. I mean, even if you've got equity, that equity is not enough now to go out and buy another property.
Yeah, and look, and this is only heightened with I guess some of the loan-to-value ratios the lenders are now looking at, where they're saying they don't want to lend over 80% on interest only. So you're quite right. So before, in previous times, people would tap into their equity to buy investment properties. There's certainly a tightening of that at the moment, and probably in the foreseeable future as well.
Well, you've been in the banking industry for a long time. Why do you think they're making these moves, just from your point of view?
Well, I think we've got a situation where there's a lot of talk about hot property prices, and look at I guess it's a bit of a situation where the RBA saw the cash rate at the historical level of 1.5%. APRA is making recommendations on the banks to curb investment lending. It's kind of the only two measures they've really got at the moment. So I think it's more around trying to put a bit of control into the housing price. Bear in mind that that's not just specific to states or suburbs of Australia.
So, Ben, in practical terms, let's say an investor wants to go out and buy a property for $400,000 with these new considerations from APRA, what's that going to do now to the amount of money needed to be worthy of a deposit? How is that going to affect the deposit amount?
Well, it's interesting. So what they're saying at the moment is that they'd like to limit the volume of interest-only lending above 80%. So it's not saying that they won't go above 80%.
They won't. So you just broke up there. So they won't go above 80%.
No, what they're saying at the moment, they just want to limit the volume of interest-only lending above 80%. But where they are stepping in and where they're saying there's got to be strong scrutiny and justification is where there's interest-only lending above 90%. So somewhere in there's a happy medium, but look, 90% lending, it could always then be a little bit more risky. You know what New Zealand's recently done with it, they've actually lowered their loan-to-value ratios kind of more to 70%, 80% as the maximum. So these are some of the measures they're looking at. But look, typically now we're talking that you need to have a deposit of anywhere between, say, 15 to 20%.
So the investors, they're really targeting investors from your point of view, and they think that that's the answer, or do you think that's the answer?
Interesting enough, it's not just investors. So if we look at interest-only lending in totality, so you've got two things here. You've got your own occupied home loan. Typically, an owner-occupied home loan, you'd be paying principal and interest.
Yeah.
Some choose to pay interest only. Now, that rate across the majors at the moment has moved up about 25 basis points. So they're penalising people now for effectively having interest only on their principal place of residence. So they want to see debt amortised down. They want to see people paying down the place they live in.
Yeah, interesting.
If you look at investment home loans, and this is coming back of last week and today, a lot of the majors are moving to kind of 24 base increase on principal interest repayments on an investment home loan, and the interest-only component would be about 26 basis points. So that's kind of taking your standard variable rates now in investment lending up to about 5.90.
Wow. Okay, well, Ben, I would love to talk again more to you, and I really appreciate you taking the time this late in the evening to chat to us.
There you go, Ben Braysich. Cheers, mate. National Manager for Century 21 Home Loans. A little bit tougher out there for investors, and potentially, as Ben said there, Charles, even if you've got a home loan and you're just paying interest only. We'll keep watching that space. Thanks for your input tonight, Charles. Fantastic. 13 12 83 is the number. Charles is here every Monday night addressing all your property questions on Property Fast Track. And stay with us in the next hour. Trevor Long is here talking technology, which follows the news. He's taking your calls on 13 12 83.